Thank you everyone for joining us today. As Tina mentioned, the idea of today's session is to be one of a series of webinars that we're going to do, working down the structure, the model, if you will, of cybersecurity that a GP, that a fund manager has to deal with in terms of cyber. Today, we're going to talk about the impact on cybersecurity with operational due diligence. So what's happening on a manager's level from the investors and allocators of the world, both at initial allocation and ongoing? How much work is that representing around cyber for the fund manager to work on? My name is Simon Eyre. As Tina said, I'm the CISO here at Drawbridge. It is my 5th year anniversary, just coming up this month. Interestingly, my first day with Drawbridge was the lockdown in the UK of COVID, the very first day, starting a new job and couldn't leave the home. It seems like a million years ago, but I can't believe I've been here for 5 years now. Lauri, thank you very much for joining us. Would you mind just a few moments to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm Lauri Haas. I run an operational due diligence firm called PRISM, which has been around for 15 and a half years, focused solely on providing ODD services on alternative investment funds across hedge funds, venture, private equity, middle market, credit, and esoteric asset classes. And so delighted to be here today to kind of give a different perspective coming from the operational due diligence chair and what we are hoping to see at GP is on the cybersecurity front.
Great, thank you. So Drawbridge last year certainly saw quite a significant change in ODD that we were helping our clients with. So part of the service that we would do is always to ensure that the fund manager knows how to respond to cyber sections, or indeed an entire cyber questionnaire that's coming from an allocator or an investor. And last year started to see a real increase in the quality of that. Previously, we'd worked in situations where perhaps we went into a meeting, and when they were dealing with traditional infrastructure, they would look and make sure there was a lock on the door for the server room and the air conditioner worked. But questionnaires now are much, much more detailed. 2 years ago, we noticed a change in cyber insurance, and now it's on the LP side that's really starting to ramp up. So, Lauri, to you, I suppose, just a first question: how do you also see ODD evolving, and what are they doing when it comes to cybersecurity?
Absolutely. I mean, I think investors, and when we're conducting operational due diligence, we want to see that there's adequate infrastructure and operational controls in place at every manager. And because of the cybersecurity risk that exists in today's world, which the risks have been, I think they've been increasing and decreasing, right? The risks have been increasing, but the amount of risk management that GPs can apply has been increasing as well. But they do have to go hand in hand. So really, I think in summary, we look for GPs to have a cybersecurity function, and that would mean either having a large technology team in-house. It has a CISO, but really in most cases, and I would say even in the cases where we have an in-house tech function, we do really want to see an outside cybersecurity firm that has the expertise, that has the know-how, that could really also come in and do a risk assessment. So if a GP doesn't have that function in place, either in-house or externally, then it's going to create a pause for investors before they think about making an investment in that fund.
I think right off the point there when you said that it's there's an increase in risk as well. That's certainly palpable. It's exactly what we see, that the financial services market is being a target here for cyber attacks. We've seen an increase. If you look at surveys that occur, it puts financial industry really only behind manufacturing at this point in terms of the number of attacks. We obviously, some of the largest attacks that make the press may not necessarily be in the financial worlds, but in terms of the volume that's happening, it's pretty significant there. And the interesting thing is it's not really size dependent as well. They're pretty opportunistic on these types of things. Wherever social engineering attacks work, they'll get in the door. So we certainly see that same sort of thing with the increase there. I mean, leaning into your sort of expertise here, what do you see managers currently dealing with when it comes to cyber due diligence? So you mentioned they may have in-house skills. If they've got an in-house CISO, they may have to outsource that. What kind of effort is the manager having to put in themselves?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think with every GP, you have to have certain functions in place. You have to have a finance function, you have to have a compliance function, technology function, and now let's add cybersecurity, right? If you don't have those four, let's call it functions, either done in-house or fully outsourced or partially outsourced, then you're probably not going to qualify for institutional money, right? And so, going to the cybersecurity front, it's an expertise, right? And so the question are you, if you're a GP, are you employing experts in the area, not just to lower your risk, but to also get your investors comfortable? So if you don't have that cybersecurity function in place, maybe you have an outsourced technology group, but that's not cybersecurity. That's not a specific type of skill sets that do it all day long, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, maybe on Saturdays, right? And so having that expertise is, I think, really what investors need and are looking for in today's day and age. An investor's going to give 10 million or 100 million or even more. I think that's really kind of a baseline requirement to ensure that the assets are going to be protected, right? And there's not going to be some missing assets due to a cyber hack, that their information is going to be protected. And the information of that investor's underlying clients, they have obligations as well. So I think the independence and the skill set is really what ODD is looking for. And the independence piece of it is also important, right? Because, it's kind of like, how can you test yourself? Like if you design
Mm.
your own technology framework, of course you think it's right and it's correct and it's the best it could be. But how, that's not your second set of eyes. So having an independent risk assessment, cybersecurity specialist come in and look at what the GP's infrastructure looks like, check to see which windows are left open by mistake, and be able to kind of, close those gaps is a baseline, I think, need for a GP in today's world.
Do you also notice, so we talk quite a lot there, and sort of going off slightly here, we talk quite a lot there about what's happening on an initial allocation. Are you seeing recurring ODD as well, that's including a cyber element that they perhaps want to review and make sure things are still up to standard?
Well, look, I mean, I think everyone's operational due diligence process is different. I think that, every time that someone performs operational due diligence on a manager for an existing or a new investment, they ought to be looking at the same things. And so that's why, whether all types of due diligence requires monitoring. And it also, so at the end of the day, that's sort of the job.
Right, right. Yeah. We've for the first time, we've also experienced a level of benchmarking with a very large institutional investor as well. So they're actually looking at where benchmarking, where the standard should be on cyber. So that can be a difficult thing for managers to really understand, is how does their cyber program perform? And are they up to a minimal standard, or are they excelling in some ways? Do you find as well, managers struggle sometimes to really know whether they're adequate at this point?
I think there's always got to be somebody in charge at a G of cybersecurity, which means that they really have to understand what their vendor is doing. And so, typically let's call that a CFO of a small to medium-sized firm. And that person really needs to be able to see through, understand, and be responsible for the cyber risk. And so, that's, something that I look at when I'm meeting with managers to understand whether they understand what's going on.
Mm,
When there's a manager that doesn't have a cybersecurity partner, that's immediately going to, trigger a flag for why they wouldn't have gone down that road. There's a very high percentage of GPs in the United States, let's call it, that do use a cybersecurity partner on top of their own technology partner. I would
yep,
say, I don't want to give the number because I don't have the entire number, but it's very high in the US.
yep,
And so if they don't have that, I think that they might, the GPs that don't, they probably want to know, well, why do I need that?
yep, yep. I mean, it's a good point, right? It's It's one of those sort of new services in some ways, much like accounting has always had an external or internal audit of the books, that's done separately from day-to-day management of the accounting functions. Cyber's really become a secondary service like that, where both technology and the administrative side of cyber, onboarding new staff, controlling permissions of staff, the monitoring of training of staff. The vast number of attacks all come from that social element. It's something like 78, 80% all start with something as simple as a human function, somebody doing something. So all of those administrative tasks are so important. And if you think cyber is still an IT problem, then that's where you really suffer the consequences of that by not really understanding where the true cyber risks lie, I think.
That's a very, very good point. That's a very good point.
If you would, I mean, in terms of what you experience as well, sort of just spotting and identifying the weaknesses in cyber programs, what are some of the things that a manager can do to improve their chances of a successful visit from yourselves when doing ODD, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it boils down to having a technology function. Let's say a firm is outsourcing technology, great. They have that skill set, that's what they do. And then there are cybersecurity firms like Drawbridge that do something else. And
Yeah,
so we want to see both. Now, it doesn't mean you couldn't get approved if you don't have both, but the idea is that you do have this arm that's doing the following. An independent risk assessment, right? Because there is a number of different
yeah,
things that could be less than optimal on your technology setup. It could be a lack of ranging from a lack of an MFA to not the highest level of security on Microsoft Office 365, or maybe you need a better license, or there's
right.
a variety of things, right? In firewalls and VPNs and all these different things that go along, with which windows are left open. So there's the risk assessment piece of it. And when someone hasn't said, and they're managing $1 billion or 500 million or $3 billion, and they haven't gone to that level to do that,
Mm,
I'd wonder why. And maybe it's just like, well, explain to me why it's valuable. Well, it's institutional money, number one, and so that needs to be treated with the utmost amount of care. And having such a risk assessment done is going to make your investors a lot more comfortable. It's also going to provide GPs with adequate more assurance. It's going to provide them with theoretical insurance, right? We went and we did all the right things. We made sure we had all these controls in place, and still, if there still is that black swan event where later on they do have a security breach on their own network, at
mm,
least they went and they did everything they were supposed to do, right? And so we have that risk assessment. And then beyond that, there's the 4 or 5 different things that we're generally looking for. Adequate cybersecurity training, onboarding, and annual and in between.
mm,
So there's always gaps somewhere. Oh, we don't do onboarding, but we just do it we do it during
right.
the annual compliance training. Oh, but by the way, that's provided by our CFO. Right. So, you want to have onboarding, you want to have at least annual, you probably want to have in between training by experts, right? And there's a variety of different options for that. But so there's training. Then we have testing, penetration testing, we have phishing testing. So all of these types
Mm,
of industry standard testing, really we want to see being done by a third party expert, because this is how we get to test the strength of sort of the perimeter of each GP's environment. And so, and then it leaves us with the last one, which I think the industry globally, certainly even in the US, still struggles with, is cybersecurity vendor due diligence. So
mm,
you're a GP and you've got a fund administrator, you've got a law firm, you've got a bank, you've got a regulatory consulting firm, you've got a lot of different vendors that hold your data. And so, it brings us to the question of how are you conducting initial due diligence on those vendors related to cyber, and then how are you monitoring them? Like, what is your vendor management program? And a lot of managers, it's probably a majority today, just don't have that being done by experts. And that's that's probably a problem.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right there. The more businesses outsource, and it you'd think we've hit some sort of threshold by now of the amount of business functions that we would outsource. But again, that's another thing that when you poll that, it's still increasing. People are looking to outsource more of their business functions. Then vendor due diligence becomes so much more important. It's becomes such a critical aspect of your workflows and your business functions, and what we like to call the operational resilience of the business now, being able to successfully function if that vendor has a problem, whether it's an outage or a breach, whatever it may be. Are you going to be able to work? So there's a kind of your own homework, if you will, there to understand what you do if you have a problem with that vendor, but also if they have a breach, have they followed the security guidelines and expectations that you would have had? And are you going to feel comfortable reporting back to your LPs that they did meet the standards, we've done everything that we should in these situations? Or are they going to be able to poke holes in the answers that you've given them? So certainly it's a part of that is definitely along with the vendor risk. It's one of those things that we see with the benchmarking of the managers as well. Sort of, is it one of those critical core fundamental functions of cybersecurity that a manager is doing? And then that's a significant market mover, if you will, on their benchmark as to whether or not they're doing that. Have you seen this? Sort of perhaps an interesting question from the GP side of things. If they are ready and willing to communicate with the LPs around things like cyber, does that improve the relationship? Is there a better chance of allocation? Is there a better partnership and relationship that builds between GP and LP when things like cyber can be very transparent and presentable to the investor?
I think absolutely. I mean, look, I think that that goes, all of the things that ODD people, that's professionals are doing are similar across the industry, right? And certainly, there may be different sensitivities at different firms for different areas, and maybe cybersecurity is very important to certain investors, right? But I think that none of the ODD findings that PRISM or other groups find are going to be that much different from the group down the road, right? And
Right.
so, if there is a set of findings, and if an investor, an ODD firm or ODD professional goes to a GP and says, look, we'd really like to invest with you, but these are certain things that we need to see at all of our managers, and it includes a cybersecurity function doing this, and this. I don't know how GP could really argue that. And certainly, the folks that are trying to do the right thing are going to say, well, if that's what the world is doing, then we want to do that too. And we also would enjoy you being an investor for $50 million, right? So there's really, we think about baseline infrastructure and costs associated with that. It's in the where we're talking about private equity and hedge funds, right? We're talking about the asset management, investment management business at a very high level.
Mm.
So all of these things, I think, on the cybersecurity front should be rolled out to all managers, as soon as possible. I think the U.S. has had a lead on a lot of this. And maybe not. It's due to some of the requirements by the US SEC. I don't know. But certainly, all of these things that we talked about so far today, I think, are really baseline needs at an investment manager.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, slightly off topic there to talk about the SEC but it is a very important question that we do get at the moment with the changes that are happening at the SEC. Will they put less emphasis on cybersecurity? And I mean, they've spun up a task force. It's focused on retail investors, but it's still focused on crypto and cybersecurity in the SEC there. And the I suppose the truth is that cyber attacks are not going to follow what any regulator does. They will continue to target not only the weakest and most opportune firms out there, but also the ones that have the best return. If it's ransomware, then a financial services firm is a great target. If it's private equity and there is new investments in private equity, those are fantastic targets for attackers. Cash rich, not really put the money into cyber and in their infrastructure. So there's a variety of things that should still keep people awake and keep people concerned. And certainly, I think from the investor's standpoint, regardless of what any regulator does, they're going to want to make sure that you're maintaining those levels of cyber to fight the good fight. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, so I'm going to take a couple of minutes to go to those. So the first one is coming back to the question of what are the minimum baselines an investor should ask their managers, and would a standard compliance framework like SOC 2, ISO 27001, NIST, etc., be worthwhile to set as a baseline for investment managers? I mean, I can certainly field that. I think for the majority of managers, the time and investment that would need to go into maintaining a program like a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001 would be quite difficult. It's certainly a role that needs to be in-house and managed, and those people are hard to find at the moment. So most managers probably wouldn't want to insource that. SOC 2 is more service related as well. I don't think it necessarily relates to the management structure of a fund. ISO could. We at Drawbridge, our model typically follows NIST certainly from a risk standard. So and I think industry wide that you'll see NIST gets used a fair amount. It's a very flexible model. You can take as much of it as you want, leave it as you need. But there are other sort of models out there. I don't know if Lauri, you come over any particular ones, any sort of cyber standards or anything yourself?
Absolutely no. I wouldn't take that approach. I think the approach is kind of the one we talked about through the call. Most of obviously the managers are not of that size where they would engage on that level.
Yeah. Second question here: does cybersecurity insurance give an LP comfort that a GP has undergone baseline level of cyber underwriting? I will say from the due diligence questionnaires that I see from cyber insurance that they are very in depth. They are, it's like I said, I think they were perhaps a year or two ahead of where investors were doing on their due diligence. So if they've been able to get a policy and the premiums are pretty attractive, that to me is probably a good sign. Although, again, you'd still want to see that in a sort of trust but verify. You'd want to see what those standards are, right, Lauri?
Yeah, I feel like my view on it is a little different. I would say if a manager has cybersecurity insurance, I'd have to look at what their cybersecurity risk management is, right?
Yeah.
I think it's nice to have. Insurance is always good to have because when there is something you don't expect, that's why we have insurance, and at least it decreases stress on the GP and while they go through that process. Because the question always is, and the question for the GP is, what would you do if you had a breach? Who would you call? And how would that impact the business?
And it's a good point around cyber insurance as well. What exactly is in scope? What is covered by that insurance? And is it ransomware? Is it social engineering attacks? Is it impersonation and fraud? Some of the most common things that we see are fraud and wire transfers and ransomware. And in some of the policies, the fraud portion, one of the most common sort of attacks and outcomes that we see isn't really covered under the cyber insurance. So you have to really know exactly what's being covered there. One last one. Why can't I do cyber due diligence myself? Do I need a CISO? Lauri, do you want to probably as an outsourced sort of CISO and cybersecurity service? I'm obviously going to say maybe some different things to you. You could have first stab.
Look, as I always say, I can do investment due diligence, but you're not going to hire me to do investment due diligence because I'm a specialist in operational due diligence. And so I think this goes hand in hand. I think that a CISO or any cybersecurity partner, does this, it's their profession, they are experts, they've studied it, they do it all day long. They know things that none of us who are focused on other things are going to know, and they're going to be able to pick up on things that others are not going to be able to chew. And I think that is just really, really very important. I think in vendor due diligence, it should be outsourced on the cybersecurity front. Because, if we talked about a couple minutes earlier about all the different vendors that one has, whether they're small or large, if you don't have the work done and you don't have all the questions answered, and then by the way, you don't have the specialist that does it all year long, understanding what the responses mean or whether they were adequate or fully answered, then you really haven't covered your firm. And so I think that's very, very important. If you have that breach, let's make it up at one of your vendors that is maybe it's a law firm, okay? And what are you going to tell your investors? Well, we did due diligence on them, but did you do cybersecurity due diligence? Well, we looked at it, and that doesn't really cover, the problem, right? And so if we outsourced it to a cybersecurity firm, which is what really the investors want us to be able to see, then you have really done all I think that you can do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think from a well, interestingly, I could have another perspective from the vendor's perspective. If they get hundreds and hundreds of different formatted cybersecurity due diligence requests and risk assessments, it can be very difficult for the vendor to manage, particularly if it's a small vendor. So there is certainly a benefit to them as well, working with a few established industry partners in arranging and organizing vendor risk assessments. So there's a sort of a side benefit to our industry as well, which has a lot of a sort of very high concentration of small vendors as well that focus on helping our GPs, our managers. So Lauri, thank you very much for today's session. Have you got any sort of closing comments and things, just sort of last things to think about for any managers out there that are worried about what their LPs are thinking?
Look, I think it's 2025. Technology is the priority. The digital approach to things is the priority. With all the other AI and other tools that are out there, I think cybersecurity should be moving to the top of the list. And for investors that are really, in tune with this, I think that it is at the top of the list.
Yeah, I completely agree. From everything that we're seeing, I think the investor side of cyber is only getting stronger and more detailed, and it's another task for the manager to add to their list of things to do. Well, thank you very much again, Lauri. It's been fantastic to have you. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us. And that's today.